He called me son, and my world flinched. Then he saw the bars and read my name. Damn's the hook a nickname, a rank, and a legacy heavy enough to bruise bone. Dawn leaks over Fort Alabaster like a confession. Sodium lights fading as the gate arm lifts and the wind tugs at flags that don't know which way to point. Sergeant Luis Ortega's eyes move from my face to the patch, to hail stitched above my heart, to the reflection of the headquarters where my father's portrait stares like a sentence already written. I swallow the aftertaste of old arguments and new oaths. A dead private, a locked hangar, and logs that arrived already wounded. I'm here to help. But every door I open seems to creak my father's name. Ortega's apology is a shrug that means no harm, but shame still crawls my neck. In the glass, I'm two men, the general's son and the army's lieutenant. Somewhere between them lies the truth. Brittle, shouting. The base wakes. Boots. Radios. Clip salutes. I step forward. The arm rises, and the past follows me through like contraband. By 800 hours, the corridors smell like coffee and floor wax, the kind of institutional permanence that outlives mistakes, and Captain Rhea Park walks beside me without wasting syllables. She doesn't ask about family. She asks about chain of custody, about why a training round shredded a vest rated to stop it, about why the flight manifest for Drone 17A reads like a redacted poem. She reminds me that conflicts of interest aren't only about dinners and photographs. They're about names stitched into uniforms and signatures echoed in your own handwriting. I tell her I will follow the code, and the lie hiding in the hangar flinches in my mind like a trapped animal. We pass the lobby where my father's portrait watches the living file past the dead, and I feel the weight of unearned salutes, of stories polished to parade shine. Rhea opens a file so thin it feels like an accusation of absence. Find what's missing, she says, and the floor seems to tilt toward the evidence room. The evidence room greets us with metal shelving and numbered silences, a climate that keeps memories from rotting while people do. Sergeant Ortega signs us in, formal now. Last hour's slip of sun, filed away like contraband he refuses to carry. The sealed bag from the range sits on a tray, its plastic cloudy with fingerprints of good intentions. Inside, a vest scarred outward, a spent casing with no legitimate origin, and a data shard stamped with the Meditz's initials, NB. Noah Bell. The boy, they said, panicked and ran. Rhea's eyes ask the question she won't give words. Are you ready to find your father here? I answer by donning gloves. The shard's metadata shows a time that shouldn't exist, a clip recorded during a drill window that was supposedly empty. The room bends tighter. Even the humming HVAC seems to whisper caution. Ortega checks the logbook and frowns. An entry torn out cleanly. Not a smudge, not a rip. A decision with scissors. The hangar is a cathedral of aluminum and secrets. Aircraft sleeping under tarps like beasts that know their own hunger. Investigator Dana Quinn meets us at the threshold. Eyes steady. Notebook already mid-sentence. She speaks with the certainty of someone who's had certainty fail her before. Drone 7A hums faintly as techs run diagnostics, an innocent expression on a guilty mouth. Dana points to maintenance stamps that repeat too perfectly, a clerk's mistake, or a command. Rhea asks for the raw telemetry. A tech shrugs toward a server with permissions above his sky. My badge gets us close. My name gets us a step back. The medic's shard plays a few frames, a flare of heat signatures where no targets should be, and a voice off-screen saying, "Sir, this isn't a drill." The sound bites off like a line cut with teeth. I feel my father's cadence in that single syllable. Sir. And hate that I know it. By noon, the rumor moves faster than orders. The general's boy is poking where medals sleep. Captain Bradley Knox arrives with a smile that's all parade and no weather, clasping my shoulder like we're brothers who survived the same fire. He tells me discretion is valor's twin and that public trust is a fragile wing. And I wonder how many times he practices those lines in a mirror. He hints that my mother's heart is delicate, that headlines eat families first. He hints that promotions depend on painless narratives. I let him talk until the echo dies. Ree's silence at my side is a permission slip to choose. I think of Noah Bell's initials burned into a shard and of a voice saying, "Sir that once taught me to tie a tie." Justice isn't a future tense here. It's a choice made inside a breath. I tell Knox that truth doesn't salute. The chill that follows is either fear leaving or courage arriving. The morgue breathes like a refrigerator full of kept promises, and Dr. Mira Sen lifts her gaze from Noah Bell's chart with the compassion of someone who refuses to look away. She speaks gently, but each word lands like a gavel, contusions inconsistent with a stumble. Microfractures suggesting recoil from something heavier than a training sim. Tissue flecks of composite that don't belong to range rounds. Rhea reads, Dana records, and I feel the old sermon of loyalty trying to drown the newer hymn of duty. Dr. Sen admits the first autopsy was done by a temp with missing credentials. Paperwork drifted through channels like a boat with its lanterns doused. Ortega stands by the door, trying to keep his face professional while grief rubs salt under the skin. When Dr. Sen reveals a tiny shard pulled from Noah's vest, an alloy blend used in live munitions, the room contracts to the span of a breath. I nod, not as a son, not as a soldier, only as a witness. By afternoon, the base chapel sits empty, except for wax ghosts and the quiet that collects where people bargain with air. I step inside because the evidence feels heavier than my uniform can carry, and for a ruthless minute, I want to be just Ethan and not Hale. My phone hums with a message from my mother. No words, only a photo of a table set for two that hasn't been used in months. Before I can reply, the door opens, and Marcus Hale crosses the threshold like a parade that forgot to bring music. He doesn't wear medals here, only the gravity of his choices. He tells me to take leave, that investigations eat their young, that I should let older hands steer this storm. I say that law outranks lineage. His eyes flicker, hurt, then hardened steel. He calls blue Vespers triage at scale, says the alternative was a bag count triple this. I ask about the Metis's shard. He answers with silence thick enough to kneel in. The sidewalk outside Public Affairs is a news tide pool where stories scuttle for oxygen, and Ava Reed is already there with a recorder. She doesn't need, and a patience she weaponizes. She knows my name, knows the Medits' initials, knows that Drone Sivene sang, a song off-key, during a window marked silent. She insists the public deserves a truth that can't be court-martialed. I tell her procedure comes first. Chain of evidence and altar we don't defile even for good intentions. She counters that delay is how lies learn to breathe. Her questions are low and exacting, finding seams in my armor without malice. Ortega intercepts, guiding her back with courteous gravity. Reyes steps in, citing policy like a shield that also happens to be right. Ava pockets the recorder and promises to print only what she can prove. The promise sounds almost tender, which is how hard things often arrive. Softly, and then forever. Night folds over Fort Alabaster, and the record's annex hums like a dressed wound. Dana secures a warrant the old-fashioned way. Ink, signatures, and a spine, and we go in with gloves and a list of ghosts. The missing log page isn't missing at all. It's reborn as a perfect facsimile that forgets to imitate a crease. The real book wears like a scar. Rhea compares inks under a portable lamp. The new page shines where history should have dulled. Ortega finds a wastebasket emptied too recently, its liner smelling like solvent and fear. In a ceiling vent, someone hid a shredded strip no bigger than a breath. Taped together, it yields a partial time stamp that matches the Medits' shard. The pattern resolves an accident painted over with doctrine. I feel anger arrive not as fire but as clarity, cold and navigable. We bag the fragments, photograph the falsity, and step back into the corridor where the motion sensors wake like startled birds. Morning returns with a storm front sky and Captain Bradley Knox, waiting like weather you can predict but not stop. He files a formal complaint: investigative overreach, fraternization with press by proximity, undue influence via family ties. It's artful, each accusation true in its outline, false in its marrow. He suggests my reassignment for optics, says the general supports the move. I hear the subtext: step away or be made to kneel. Rhea counters with case law and Dana's chain of custody map. Ortega adds a witness statement that threads our findings into policy's loom. Knox's smile thins, then steadies. He asks if I'm willing to see my father in a witness box. I answer that I'm willing to see anyone there who signed the order. The room holds its breath. Knox nods like a man who has just decided which bridge to burn first, and when he leaves, the air smells faintly of cordite and cologne. The server room is a winter of machines, breath turning small in the blue glow as Dana coaxes a reluctant warrant officer into truth with the patience of a locksmith smoothing a stubborn key. Rhea reads the authorization aloud so there's no mistaking form for threat, and I stand at the terminal feeling the tremor of a line I can't uncross. The archive opens like an old wound stubbornly sealed. Telemetry scrolls, clean numbers spelling dirty deeds. A buried subdirectory blinks awake. Redundant cache, misnamed like a mischief. Inside, frames of heat and screaming static resolve into rooftops, figures, a flare of metal, and a voice confirming coordinates with a cadence I have known since bedtime stories. The authentication tag bears my father's call sign, routed through a proxy that pretends to be a training server. The text says the proxy was installed base-wide after Blue Vespers to streamline drills. Streamline, as in a race. The room feels smaller. Dana's pen stops. Rhea looks at me without comfort or accusation, only law. We pull the data, chain it tight, and step back into air that suddenly weighs more. The diner off Highway 12 smells like syrup and trucker stories, chrome catching afternoon sun the way memories catch the throat. My mother sits in a corner booth with 2 cups, one for a son she hoped would never wear conflict on his face again. She talks softly, threading yesterday into warnings for tomorrow, saying your father believes in triage because he learned the cost of hesitation, saying families are not juries because love isn't admissible. I answer that justice doesn't accept character references from blood, and her mouth makes the smallest, saddest line. She says Marcus carries names I will never hear, and that guilt taught him to be efficient. I tell her efficiency buried Noah Bell. The chatter around us continues, indifferent, and for a moment I hate how easily the world moves while truth drags. She reaches across the Formica, palm warm, and asks only that I survive the story I insist on telling. I promise nothing I can't keep. I promise only that I won't lie. Evening folds into that violet hour when secrets think they're invisible, and Ava Reed waits by the motor pool where generators purr like distant bees. She doesn't need my confirmation. She needs corroboration. And she brings her own, an anonymous packet dropped to her inbox showing procurement orders for munitions, labeled as training components, signatures all neat until they repeat a flourish like a nervous tick. Ortega stands with me, jaw working, because he knows the handwriting of the quartermaster who retired early and too quietly. We outline the paper trail in our minds, a doctrine invented to protect optics, a proxy installed to launder decisions, a boy who recorded what courage sounds like when it's scared. Ava says she can publish by morning. I tell her the case will break without the press, but it will break cleaner with it, timed to warrants we can hold. She nods, tucks the folder away, and promises proof will move when the dam must. The promise feels like a fuse lit with care. Knox summons me to a readiness review that smells like citrus cleaner and staged outcomes. He smiles for the room, not for me, reading from a memo that proposes my reassignment to preserve impartiality. and the colonels nod like metronomes ticking the beat of their careers. Rhea arrives with a blistered calm and slides copies of our ink analysis across the table. Her voice, even as she walks them through the counterfeit page, the solvent tang, the timestamp shard drawn from the vent. Dana lays down the telemetry tag with my father's call sign, and the air hiccups. Knox pivots, quick as a fox under a fence, claiming chain of command protocols allow delegated signatures that authentication proves only access, not intent. I ask who benefits from a missing page that reappears with no crease and all the right lies. His eyes harden. The meeting adjourns with nothing decided and everything decided. Afterward, he leans in so close I count the mint on his breath, and he says warmly that careers are a kind of truth, too. The operations theater holds, maps like constellations in silence, like a verdict. General Marcus Hale stands before a wall of moving weather and movements of men, briefing a storm cell when his aide slips him a note that freezes the air by a degree jag. Seeks an interim injunction on Drone 7E. He never looks at me but addresses the room about readiness, about trust in processes larger than any one name. I hear the parental echo, and the command steel braided tight. When the room clears, we remain, father and son in the unspooling of a legacy. I place the Metis's recovered clip on the table. He watches the thermal bloom, the civilians clustering in a heat shimmer of fear. The voice off-screen saying, "Sir," with the cadence I borrowed as a child. He closes his eyes, not in denial, but in inventory. He says the strike prevented worse, and that history is a butcher who cleans his knives with statistics. I ask who gives the dead their receipts. He opens his eyes and says, quietly, "You do." The warrant arrives with the weight of clean paper and consequence, and suddenly corridors that once echoed with routine begin to speak in whispers. Dana moves first, shepherding it into a narrow conference room where the proxy's audit trail unspools like a reluctant confession. Rhea marks each recovery with a timestamp as exacting as prayer. I watch CW2 Jamie Lynn, fingers hovering over keys, like a pianist afraid of the next chord. She admits the proxy was pushed base-wide after Blue Vespers with a guidance memo that came unsigned but delivered by Captain Knox, and the install window matches the day the training manifest turned into a veil. Ortega stands by the door, as if guarding the truth from drafts. The logs reveal delegated credentials. My father's call sign rerouted through a service account that belongs to no one human. Rhea reads the clause that turns negligence into fraud, and in that moment the air changes temperature, the way weather does when a storm stops pretending it will pass. Before dawn can steady itself, the base paw crackles through a lockdown drill that isn't a drill, and Ava's story lands like weather on every screen outside the gates. Procurement, sleight of hand. A proxy that launders orders. A young private whose recording refuses to die. Public Affairs calls it misinformation with a speed that only the guilty can manage, and Knox frames it as sabotage by an ambitious lieutenant who cannot separate filial grief from duty. Rhea files for preservation orders. Dana parcels out tasks with the calm of a triage nurse who never stops counting. I think about the cost of being early to the truth doors close. Allies become profiles moving away down polished halls, and even silence earns a badge. Ortega bumps my shoulder in the hallway, a small human nudge that says, "Keep your feet where your oath is." My phone buzzes with a single text from my mother, "Be careful." And I answer with the only thing she will accept I will. Dr. Sen calls us to the lab with a voice that has no theater in it, only fact. She has reconstructed fragments from Noah Bell's vest and cross-matched them to residue found in a sealed evidence drawer labeled training debris. The alloy is identical to live ordnance certified for Blue Vespers, the same batch that was consumed in theater, now somehow reborn on a stateside range. She opens a refrigerated drawer and reveals a secondary sample. Epithelial traces that don't belong to Noah at all. a second handler whose DNA aligns with a quartermaster who retired mid-year and signed the procurement forms in Avi's dossier. The room narrows to pulse and air. Rhea dictates a request for a grand jury referral. Dana schedules an interview that will not be polite. I feel the story pivot. The midpoint arrive like a hinge. Noah didn't panic. He recorded a truth someone else fired. The word accident evaporates. What remains is a decision with coordinates. The preliminary Article 32. Hearing convenes in a room that mistakes order for justice until justice makes itself known. Knox arrives polished, a file like a blade, arguing that chain of command creates a fog where signatures become ceremony and responsibility diffuses into air. Rhea counters with the plain language of the Uniform Code, then lays the proxy log beside the counterfeit page. Dana follows with the munitions batch report that refuses to be anything but itself. I speak last, not as son or subordinate, but as custodian of what the dead left us, a timestamp, a heat bloom, a voice that says sir and means someone should have said stop. From the gallery, my father watches with the impassivity of mountains. When the colonel asks about delegated credentials, he answers in a register too calm to be spontaneous. He approved a system, not a strike. The room divides on that sentence. The panel orders full proceedings. Knox smiles like a gambler buying time with someone else's chips. When the fire alarm warbles in the hangar, everyone moves like they've rehearsed, but the scent is wrong. Ozone and panic, not smoke. A tech sprints toward drone CV&A, with a drive caddy clutched to his chest, and I see the future if he reaches the bay, a silence sanitized into permanence. Ortega cuts left. Dana shouts for containment. Rhea calls out that the preservation order covers that hardware-like skin. I meet the tech at the ladder, and he is younger than the lie he carries. His badge trembles on a lanyard that spells the quartermaster's old department. He says Knox told him to purge temp caches per standard accident protocol. I tell him the only standard here is evidence. For a heartbeat, he teeters between fear and relief, then hands me the caddy like a man passing a confession to air. MPs flood the doors. The alarm stops. In the sudden quiet, the drone sits with the patience of a witness ready to speak if we let it. The caddy opens like a stubborn jaw, and the bites inside speak in a dialect of guilt. Rhea mirrors the drive while Dana inventories each folder as if counting heartbeats, and Ortega stands watch against the ordinary ways truth gets misplaced. Enter Neshi Q. The files aren't tidy. They're a thicket of temp caches and autosaves, rehearsals of commands fired at the proxy in the hours before Noah Bell's vest was torn. We find a rehearsal strike seeded with civilian heat signatures labeled as non-player entities, a euphemism so clean it feels surgical. The execution timestamp overlays the Metis shard like two X-rays of the same broken bone. I feel my father's shadow lengthen across the floor, even though he isn't here. He is present in the naming of things, in the strategic distance between order and authorization. Rhea exhales a soft verdict and says the word conspiracy, with no music at all. Dana nods once and begins drafting warrants with a pen that sounds like thunder in the quiet. The summons lands like a hard-seasoned general, Marcus Hale to appear for compelled interview under counsel. He arrives without an entourage, only the careful dignity of a man who has practiced losing before. Knox sits to his left, polished and predatory, objecting in the precise places where answers would grow roots. Rhea guides the rhythm, foundation, relevance, admission, and Dana threads exhibits through the air until the room breathes slower. I ask about the proxy's birth, the quartermaster's flourish, the approval chain that ends where his call sign begins. My father's eyes hold the ocean's old patience. He says he authorized efficiencies, not outcomes, and that war mislabels mercy all the time because history's grammar is cruel. I tell him grammar didn't rip a vest. A decision did. For a long moment, the interview is only breathing and the ticking of a wall clock. Then he says he trusted the men below him and the system above him, and in that gap, Noah fell. By evening, the base hum has shifted into a rumor with teeth, and Public Affairs frames the narrative like a portrait it hopes will hang straight an overzealous lieutenant, a grieving unit, an honorable general, caught in procedural crossfire. In sea, in, and sure, crossfire. Ava reads update slices through the varnish. Procurement ledgers, the counterfeit page, the drive caddy saved at the ladder, and suddenly phones vibrate like a percussion section. Ortega tells me MPs loyal to Knox have started escort checks, a euphemism with boots on it. Dana texts that our warrants cleared, but access will be resisted at the quartermaster's old cage. Rhea repeats the word lawful as if it can anchor a storm. My mother calls and doesn't speak at first. When she does, it's to say that truth is a house you don't get to leave just because it's on fire. I step into night air that smells of jet fuel and rain and understand that the next move will cost a piece of something that won't grow back. The quartermaster's cage is a metallic throat-swallowing sound. Rows of crates stacked like unspoken sentences. 2 MPs block our warrant with the sort of politeness that comes from recent orders. Rhea reads the statute. Dana holds up the judge's signature, and Ortega, quietly, firmly, asks them whether they'd like to be on the side of inventory or integrity in the record. They step aside a pace that feels like a page turning. Inside, we find the ledger that invented a training component out of livestock, the microstamps aligning with Dr. Sen's spectrograph-like constellations proving sailors right. We also find absence a gap on the shelf labeled Sevigny Temp, a dust rectangle where a drive should sleep. Footprints arc toward a loading door. Outside, a shadow detaches from a forklift and runs. I chase because the choice is older than my uniform. When I catch him, he is shaking so hard, the key fob rattles. He says he was told to move the box. No names. Only a voice from a phone that never calls twice. Knox files an emergency motion to suspend me pending inquiry, a surgical strike disguised as procedure, and the colonel signs it with a hand that looks tired of lines. I'm to surrender badge, sidearm, and access until further notice. The paper is crisp. The intent is blunt. Ortega's jaw works. Dana hisses air like a fuse. Rhea studies the language and finds a seam the size of courage. Suspension doesn't bar me from testifying, nor from delivering sealed evidence already logged. She gathers the packets, places them in my hands, and says what matters is that I walk them to jagged chambers before midnight, because the clock is a weapon too. I unclip the badge that has been both shield and shackle and feel strangely lighter, like a man stepping out of a story he was written into. Outside, the rain has stopped. The base smells clean and temporary. I start walking, evidence cradled, a son carrying the weight his father should have borne. The walk to JAG feels like a hallway carved through weather, and halfway there the base changes its mind about me. 2 MPs step from a shadow with orders that read like erasure, asking for the envelopes I cradle as if truth were a quiet weapon, requiring immediate surrender. Suspension means silence, they say, but the preservation stamp says otherwise, and Rhea's seam in the law holds like a stitch against tearing. Ortega appears from another corridor with that calm that looks like kindness until you notice the steel underneath. He reminds them that chain of custody cannot be broken by convenience. Their radios crackle with a new instruction. A voice that could be Knox or could just be ambition wearing his cologne. Dana arrives with a rolling cart and an evidence ledger already open to the right line. She doesn't argue. She only points until the moment yields. We move as a small convoy through a building that would prefer we were scenery. The envelopes thrum against my ribs like a second heart. Outside JAG chambers, the air has the brittle clarity of glass about to sing, And when the door opens, it is my father who steps into the threshold, uniform immaculate, eyes at tide, refusing to recede. He asks for a minute, as if minutes were furniture he could arrange, and Rhea, careful and lawful, grants exactly 60 seconds in the foyer, with a recorder running like a clock with teeth. He does not bargain. He narrates a world in which command exists to spare, subordinates the arithmetic of guilt. A world where intent launders effect. He offers me distance from the wreckage, transfer, graduate program, time. If I let the institution handle its own shadows, I tell him shadows lengthen when left alone. His jaw tightens into a weather line. His jaw tightens into a weather line. He says he will testify to policy, not to memory. I say memory is the only witness that doesn't need a rank. The minute ends with a beep that sounds like a heartbeat learning restraint. I pass him carrying the weight he declined. Inside, the evidence becomes language Rhea. Reading chain of custody, like scripture. Dana laying down the proxy logs, the counterfeit page, the caddy files, each piece a note in a score that refuses dissonance. The colonel presiding looks older by the paragraph, not from shock, but from recognition. The slow ache of systems seeing themselves. Knox argues process like a maze with no center, insisting that every signature is a shadow of another, that accountability evaporates at scale. He calls my actions zealotry, dressed as protocol. I answer with the unromantic facts of time and microstamp and voice. When the Medicis shard plays, the room breathes shallow, and for once Knox has no words that can outvote a heat bloom. Ava texts that civilian filings are stacking at the courthouse. Outside pressure is not the law, but it becomes the weather the law must stand in. The colonel orders protective custody for the data and schedules public proceedings. The room exhales. I do not. Evening drags a bruise-colored sky over the base when the quartermaster, retired, summoned, cornered, arrives for deposition and finds courage the way people find exits in smoke. He admits the flourish repeated on forged pages is his, performed under direction, a word he cannot dress with a name. He cites phone orders routed through an aide who answered to Knox. Inventory swapped to preserve optics after. Blue Vespers standardized the proxy. Doctor sends report, ties his ledgers to the alloy that tore Noah's vest. He signs the statement with a wobble that reads, like relief. The domino sound is almost audible. Knox requests a recess long enough to organize indignation. The colonel grants 5 minutes and makes it feel like a sentence. In the hall, Ortega murmurs that the men in the motor pool are done carrying ghosts. I look at my hands and see no tremor, only steadiness I don't recognize as mine. Maybe justice lends a spine when it borrows your name. Night makes everything honest. I step outside and the base is a grid of lights and choices. The wind, carrying the mineral smell of rain that hasn't arrived yet. My mother waits near the chapel steps, a silhouette I would know even in a blackout. And she tells me that love and justice are not rivals but relatives who don't always speak. She says she married a man who believed duty could bend fate, and bore a son who believes truth can straighten it. She asks, simply, if I can live with the cost of both being right in their own weather. I answer that rightness without receipts is just opinion with better posture. She laughs, small and sad, and kisses my cheek like a benediction for a road that once softened. When she leaves, I see my father in the distance, alone under a sodium lamp, a statue studying its shadow. Tomorrow there will be a hearing with cameras and rank and oaths. Tonight, there is only a choice that is no longer a choice. Morning arrives with the choreography of consequence, cameras nesting like birds along the rail, badges blooming across chests, a buzz that tastes like metal. I raise my hand, swear the oath, and feel the syllables coat the ache in something steadier than hope. Rhea walks me through the road. We paved the counterfeit page that forgot a crease, the proxy that laundered intent, the caddy rescued from a ladder, the alloy that refused to be called training. The voice on Noah Bell's shard, saying sir into a room that wanted silence. Knox objects on timing, on tone, on the idea that truth must be punctual to be valid. The colonel overrules with the weariness of someone who has already buried too many almosts. I do not say father. I say call sign, timestamp, delegation, foreseeable misuse. I do not say grief. I say heat bloom, microstamp, chain of custody. The room grows very still, as if stillness were a verdict practicing its lines. When I step down, I am lighter and lonelier, and exactly where my oath put me. General Marcus Hale speaks in the Register of Doctrine, a voice built to hold formations steady, while weather makes up its mind. He lays out efficiencies, redundancies, the necessity of triage in a world where hesitation kills faster than shrapnel. He says he authorized a system and trusted subordinates to honor its rails. Rees crosses surgical without cruelty. Who drafted the guidance, who carried it by hand, why the proxy's audit trail wears his call sign like a coat. He answers with distance, and then with the first-person plural that commanders use when the weight is shared, but the signature is singular. Dana introduces the quartermaster's sworn statement, the forensic match to livestock, and the tech's affidavit about standard accident protocol. Knox rises to reframe and finds the frame cracked. His objections rattle, then thin. My father's eyes find mine across the room, not pleading, not daring, measuring. He says he accepts responsibility for the system that made misuse possible. The findings arrive with the restraint of law, not the fireworks of story probable cause established for falsifying official records, conspiracy to obstruct an investigation, dereliction through reckless system design. Charges referred for Captain Bradley Knox and others named in the ledgers. Administrative relief for General Marcus Hale, pending full review. Resignation tendered and accepted with the clean brutality of a signature. The colonel thanks the gallery for decorum as if we were witnesses to a ceremony instead of an autopsy. Reporters surge and then are gentled back by MPs, who understand how to move a crowd without bruising it. I step into the corridor and there he is, my father without a command at his back. A man in a uniform that suddenly looks heavier than fabric. He says the machine is supposed to spare sons from choosing between blood and code. I say machines learn from the men who build them. He nods once, a salute he cannot give, and walks toward a door labeled exit that means beginning. Noah Bell's memorial does not mistake ceremony for repair. It offers names to the air and lets the air carry them. The chapel smells like wood polish and raincoats drying and PVT. Bell's mother holds a folded flag with the bravery of someone who knows bravery isn't what you feel, but what you do next. Ortega reads the roll with a voice that breaks only once and exactly where it should. Dana places the recovered shard beneath a frame that now tells the truth. Rhea speaks about law as a shelter built board by board. I stand when asked and say that justice is not vengeance in uniform, that accuracy is a kind of love owed to the living and the dead, that Noah didn't panic. He persisted. There are no trumpets, only breath, and the sound of shoes shifting as people decide what promises they will keep. Outside, Ava waits with her notebook closed. Today, the story belongs to a family. We leave in pairs, softer-footed, as if the floor were learning to carry us more carefully. Dawn returns to Fort Alabaster with a different gait, quieter, as if the ground had exhaled. My suspension lifts with a dry stamp. My future remains undecorated on purpose. In the evidence room, shelves look less like a maze and more like a map. Ortega jokes about coffee that tastes like accountability. Dana has already drafted a training protocol that kills the proxy and births a ledger with teeth. Rhea files the reforms with the same handwriting that carried our case, from rumor to record. I walk the perimeter road where this began, the gate arm rising with a humility I didn't notice before. My phone buzzes. My mother's text is a single sunrise emoji followed by nothing, which is somehow everything. I think about my father somewhere answering questions that won't end quickly, and about Noah Bell, whose name will now be said with the right verbs. The wind lifts the flag and it doesn't know which way to point, but for once I do. I step forward, and the past stays where it belongs. Evidence, not destiny.